They told us we wouldn't be trusted. That kindness didn't exist here. Elsa Schmidt whispered to herself as she stepped off the dusty truck, the Texas sun pressing down like a physical weight. The horizon stretched endlessly, golden light bouncing off miles of dry grass and the distant shapes of cattle moving lazily across the plains. Every sound was amplified. The clink of her worn boots on the wooden ramp, the soft creak of the truck door, the gentle rustle of mesquite leaves in the wind. She adjusted the strap of her apron, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliarity of freedom and the unknown expectations of the ranch. John Brennan stood on the porch of the main house, tall and broad-shouldered, boots coated in red dust, hat pulled low against the sun. His eyes followed her, noting the cautious precision in her movements, the way she kept her gaze forward yet absorbed every detail. The split-rail fence, the scattered feed buckets, the shadows cast by the morning light. Elsa's companions moved behind her, tentative, their gray uniforms stark against the warm tones of the ranch, eyes wide at the sheer openness, the absence of barbed wire and guard towers. The air smelled of sun-baked earth, bacon sizzling faintly in a skillet inside the house, and a hint of coffee carried on the breeze. Elsa inhaled slowly, the scents washing over her like a memory of something she couldn't quite name, a life she had never lived but instinctively recognized. She stepped toward the kitchen, observing the rhythmic movements of a hired hand sweeping floors, the methodical chopping of vegetables on a wooden board. John called her name softly, and she flinched, startled by the sound that was neither threatening nor commanding. He held out a hand, small gesture, inviting, neutral, a bridge. She hesitated, then nodded, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease fractionally. The ranch itself seemed alive, not with threat, but with quiet expectation. The wind through the tall grass, the low murmur of cattle, the distant clatter of pans from the kitchen, all combined to create a landscape that was both strange and strangely comforting. Elsa's eyes flicked to a stack of firewood, neatly arranged, the precision of it contrasting with the chaos of her recent memories. She took a tentative step forward, noting the way her boots sank slightly into the soft soil, the sound, absorbed by the vast openness around her. The other women followed, each step a negotiation between fear and curiosity, between the world they had been told about and the reality before them. A breeze lifted her hair slightly, and she caught a glimpse of movement in the barn, a horse shifting its weight, nostrils flaring, and she paused, hand instinctively reaching for the edge of her apron. John watched silently, recognizing the small gestures, the micro-reactions, the way her body spoke before words ever could. He adjusted a water can on his shoulder, the metal glinting in the sunlight, and moved toward the barn, slow, deliberate, a signal that he was present but not imposing. Elsa exhaled, a quiet breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and stepped toward the wooden gate leading into the open pen. The scent of hay mixed with dry dirt filled her senses. She noticed the pattern of shadows shifting across the ground, the way the sunlight carved lines along the fence rails. Each motion was a lesson in observation, a rehearsal for adaptation, a rehearsal for trust. Her fingers brushed against the cool wood of the gate, and she paused, listening. The distant call of a meadowlark, the soft snort of a horse, the faint creak of the porch swing behind her. John approached slightly, a respectful distance, eyes steady but encouraging. He gestured to a stack of feed sacks and then to a water trough, a silent offer of guidance, a quiet permission to begin. Elsa nodded subtly, heart still beating rapidly, a mix of caution and anticipation settling in her chest. She lowered herself to start the morning chores, measuring feed into buckets, the grains slipping softly through her fingers, the texture foreign yet grounding. The others mirrored her movements, a chorus of careful, synchronized steps. Around them, the ranch exhaled warmth and light, indifferent yet inviting, challenging yet protective. The vastness of the plains reminded Elsa of how small they were, yet how expansive the possibility of connection could be. She stole a glance at John, who stood watching over the process with quiet approval, and allowed herself the faintest flicker of something like hope to stir within her. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the red dust into a shimmering haze over the open plains. Elsa Schmidt paused at the edge of the corral, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and observed the horses shifting in their stalls, their soft snorts mingling with the distant hum of the wind through the tall grass. She felt the warmth of the sun on her back and the texture of the apron in her hands, the fabric rough against her fingertips. Around her, the other German women moved with deliberate care, each step measured, each gesture precise, their gray uniforms dull against the bright canvas of the ranch. John Brennan appeared near the barn, his wide-brimmed hat casting a long shadow across the dirt path, hands resting on his hips as he watched them work. He did not speak, letting his presence convey steadiness, a silent assurance that they were allowed to explore, to learn, to become part of the rhythm of the ranch without fear of reprimand. Elsa adjusted the lid of a bucket, listening to the soft clatter of feed against the wooden floor, the low murmur of the cattle, and the far-off call of a meadowlark that spiraled through the sunlit air. Each sound was amplified in the vast openness, and she found herself absorbing details she had not noticed before. The scent of hay, tinged with the faint smoke of a nearby cook fire, the sweetness of sun-warmed earth, the metallic glint of water troughs catching the light. She inhaled slowly, letting her lungs fill with air so different from the damp, heavy atmosphere of the transport trucks and the cramped barracks she had left behind. Her eyes traced the movement of John as he walked toward the kitchen, pausing to tilt a water can slightly to allow a trickle to flow into a trough, ensuring the horses could drink. Elsa mirrored his motions unconsciously, measuring the rhythm, the intent behind each action, the absence of coercion in every gesture. The other women began to gather around a long wooden table, bringing small bowls and knives, preparing vegetables with the same careful precision. The morning unfolded with the deliberate pacing of work intertwined with discovery. The women whispered in soft German, their words hesitant, cautious, yet tinged with curiosity, as they navigated the routines of chopping, stirring, and organizing. John moved among them, occasionally pointing out the best way to balance a basket, the correct way to measure feed, never speaking in raised tones, never commanding, only guiding. Elsa felt a strange comfort in the predictability of his actions, the consistency of his attention without intrusion. She could see him notice the small successes and the small struggles, offering an encouraging nod or a quiet adjustment of a misplaced pan. The kitchen smelled of bacon frying, eggs sizzling in cast iron, and coffee that steamed gently, carrying its aroma across the sunlit porch and into the open yard. Elsa paused to wipe her brow, feeling the warmth of the morning and the heat of exertion, but there was a lightness she had not felt for months, a sense that she was capable of mastering this new environment, that her actions had consequence beyond mere survival. She looked across the yard, noting how the horses moved without hurry, how the cattle grazed with an easy rhythm, and she realized the pace of life here was governed not by fear, but by routine and care. A soft breeze carried the faint clatter of dishes from the house, the laughter of one of the ranch hands correcting a misaligned stack of pans, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Elsa adjusted the apron over her uniform, tightened the strap at her waist, and moved toward the table to begin arranging vegetables for the first batch of meatballs. She could feel the anticipation humming quietly under her skin, a careful mixture of nervousness and focus. Each movement was deliberate. She rolled the meat gently in her palms, measured spices with attention, set them into neat rows on the tray. The other women watched and mirrored her movements, the synchronization a silent agreement of shared purpose. John stood back, observing with calm interest, recognizing the care in their motions, the subtle signs of growing confidence, the quiet understanding that work here was not punishment, but contribution. The sunlight shifted slowly, casting longer shadows across the yard, highlighting the texture of dirt and wood, of weathered fence posts and soft fur. Elsa took a moment to breathe, closing her eyes briefly to take in the sounds, the shuffle of feet on the floorboards, the soft scrape of knives against cutting boards, the faint hiss of frying meat, and the distant lowing of cattle. It was a chorus of ordinary life, a rhythm that she could trust, a pattern that made the strange landscape of the ranch feel navigable. The other women murmured quietly to one another, commenting on the size of the vegetables, the unexpected warmth of the kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, the absence of fear in their speech. Elsa's hands moved almost automatically, placing the meatballs on a baking sheet, aligning them with care, noting the pattern of their spacing. The smell of seasoned meat and freshly cracked eggs filled the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of the wooden table and the sun-drenched porch. She glanced toward John, who nodded subtly, acknowledging the effort, the precision, the care without saying a word. A small sense of pride lifted her chest, a quiet confirmation that she could be trusted here, that her actions mattered, that her presence contributed to something larger than herself. The morning light continued to spread across the plains, illuminating the ranch in soft gold, highlighting the diligent movements of the women, the patient guidance of John, and the delicate balance of curiosity, caution, and emerging trust that threaded through the early hours of work. Elsa inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth, the scents, and the subtle pulse of life around her, and allowed herself a tentative smile, the first flicker of ease settling into the cadence of the day. The sun climbed higher over the Texas plains, casting long, sharp shadows across the porch and stretching the warm light into every corner of the yard. Elsa Schmidt moved deliberately among the workstations, her hands steady as she shaped meatballs with practiced precision, the texture of the ground beef and seasonings cool against her palms. She glanced toward the kitchen door, where the smell of sizzling bacon and the rich aroma of coffee mingled with the faint scent of hay drifting in from the barn. The other German women mirrored her actions, arranging their ingredients with meticulous care, whispering quietly in their soft German tones, each word cautious, measured, and infused with anticipation. John Brennan observed from a short distance, hat tilted to shield his eyes from the sun, boots planted firmly in the red dust, hands resting on his hips as he took in the careful rhythm of their movements. He did not intervene, allowing the women to establish their own pace, their own sense of competence within the unfamiliar routine. A breeze stirred across the open plains, carrying the faint jingling of a bell from the cattle in the distance, the soft scrape of a rake against wooden boards, and the occasional clatter of a metal pan from the kitchen. Elsa paused briefly, rolling a meatball between her hands, noticing the way the sunlight highlighted the gentle curve of the tray, the specks of seasoning catching in the light. She inhaled slowly, the warmth of the morning sun mixing with the rich sense of cooking, and she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Her eyes flicked to John, who gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement, the smallest of gestures conveying trust and approval. She returned the nod, a quiet understanding passing between them without words. The women continued their work, hands moving in unison as if guided by a shared rhythm, the soft murmur of conversation blending with the ambient sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead, the gentle rustle of tall grass. Elsa reached for a bowl of spices, measuring carefully, each pinch deliberate, aligning them into neat rows before incorporating them into the mixture. She felt the weight of her responsibility, not as an obligation but as a contribution to the day, a subtle bridge between herself and the unfamiliar world around her. The wooden table beneath her hands was warm from the morning sun, the grains of the wood catching the light, revealing a texture that was both natural and reassuring. She glanced up and noticed John moving toward the barn, adjusting a water trough and calling softly to one of the horses, his movements deliberate and steady. Elsa allowed herself a small smile, observing the way the animals responded to his presence, the soft nuzzle of a horse, the careful steps of the cow as it approached the water, and she felt the rhythm of life on the ranch settling into her own movements. As the trays of prepared meatballs began to fill, the women exchanged glances, subtle smiles passing between them, a quiet acknowledgement of shared accomplishment. The aroma of cooking meat mixed with the sense of sun-baked earth and the faint sweetness of hay, creating a sensory tapestry that grounded Elsa in the present, a sharp contrast to the uncertainty of recent months. She wiped her hands on her apron, feeling the slight roughness of the fabric against her skin, and adjusted the hem to keep it tidy, mindful of each gesture. The sunlight continued to spread across the yard, highlighting the movements of the women, the attentive watchfulness of John, and the delicate interplay of shadows and light that seemed to infuse the day with both challenge and comfort. Each sound, each motion, Each scent contributed to a growing sense of belonging, a subtle thread weaving Elsa and the other women into the life of the ranch, a rhythm that required attention, care, and observation. She positioned the last tray of meatballs carefully, aligning them in straight rows, and took a moment to breathe, letting the heat of the sun, the scent of the cooking, and the gentle presence of John in the distance wash over her. The ranch seemed to exhale with the day, offering a quiet, steady pulse of life, and Elsa allowed herself to feel a measure of confidence, the faintest flicker of pride and anticipation stirring within her as she prepared to take the next step in learning, adapting, and participating fully in the rhythm of the day. The late morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow across the wide expanse of the Texas ranch, illuminating the uneven rows of feed sacks and the long shadows of the fence posts. Elsa Schmidt moved among the others, carefully placing trays of prepared meatballs near the stove, each movement deliberate and precise. The aroma of seasoned meat mingled with the faint scent of freshly baked bread and the earthy smell of sun-warmed hay, creating a comforting tapestry of scent that seemed almost unfamiliar in its calmness. She glanced toward John Brennan, who was adjusting the water troughs and watching the horses with measured patience, his hat tipped low to shield his eyes from the bright light, the lines of his face relaxed yet attentive. Elsa felt a subtle shift in her chest, a quiet sense of belonging beginning to take root, tempered with the cautious awareness that every action was being observed, every step a balance between independence and deference. The women whispered softly in German, their voices blending with the ambient sounds of the ranch, the gentle clop of hooves, the rustling of tall grass, the distant hum of a windmill turning slowly in the breeze. Elsa rolled a meatball between her palms, feeling the coolness of the mixture and noting the way the sunlight highlighted the tiny flecks of seasoning, the texture of the meat firm yet pliable. She positioned the balls carefully on the tray, spacing them evenly, as if the act itself were a form of silent communication, a way to convey respect and diligence. John moved closer, his steps careful on the soft ground, and nodded subtly, a gesture that spoke of acknowledgement and trust without words. Elsa allowed a faint smile to touch her lips, a quiet recognition of the small connection forming between her and the world around her. The afternoon light shifted, casting long, slanting shadows across the porch and into the yard, highlighting the movements of the women as they prepared vegetables, measured spices, and aligned trays with precision. Elsa inhaled the warm air, carrying the sense of cooking, earth, and sunlight, and felt a deepening sense of rhythm, a cadence established between their careful motions and the steady presence of John. She noticed the way one of the younger women, Anna, hesitated over a tray of chopped herbs, her hands trembling slightly, and Elsa reached out gently, guiding her without intrusion, demonstrating the care required without speaking loudly or giving orders. The subtle gesture conveyed a quiet reassurance, and Anna nodded, the tension easing from her shoulders. Elsa returned her attention to the trays, aligning the final row of meatballs, and allowed herself a moment to absorb the sounds and movements of the ranch, the low murmur of conversation, the distant calls of birds, the soft brushing of grass in the wind. Each detail added to the sense of ordinary life, a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty and rigidity of the camps she had left behind. John moved among the women again, offering guidance through presence rather than speech, showing the method to measure feed, adjust trays, and tend to the horses, his actions consistent, deliberate, and quietly instructive. Elsa followed his lead, noting the small techniques, the subtle shifts in posture, the ways in which observation and repetition could build competence. The sunlight fell across the wooden surfaces, illuminating the texture of cutting boards, the sheen of metal bowls, and the soft fur of the animals moving in the pens. Elsa inhaled slowly, feeling the warmth, the scents, and the soft weight of the sun on her shoulders, grounding her in the moment. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment in the rhythm of work, the care she and the other women invested, and the acknowledgement, unspoken yet felt, in the steady presence of John. The day unfolded in a gentle cadence, each step deliberate, each motion precise, each breath measured, as Elsa and the others adapted to the unfamiliar yet welcoming environment. The interplay of light, scent, and sound created a sensory landscape in which trust and attention intertwined, shaping the day, the tasks, and the quiet connections forming without the need for words. She paused for a moment, placing a hand on the edge of the tray, closing her eyes briefly, listening to the chorus of ordinary life. The distant lowing of cattle, the soft scrape of tools on wood, the faint murmur of wind through the grass, and allowed herself to feel the subtle shift of confidence growing. The quiet knowledge that she could belong here, that her actions mattered, that she was learning the rhythm of this new life. The afternoon sun slanted lower across the ranch, warming the wooden planks of the porch and casting long, dancing shadows over the red clay yard. Elsa Schmidt moved carefully among the women, their trays of meatballs lined up neatly, the smell of seasoned meat and herbs filling the warm air, mixing with the earthy aroma of hay and the subtle sweetness of sun-warmed soil. She adjusted her apron, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and felt the heat of the day pressing gently against her shoulders, a reminder of the sun's constant presence on the wide plains. The other German women moved with focused precision, whispering in soft German, their voices cautious, measured, yet carrying an undercurrent of anticipation. John Brennan watched from a distance near the barn, hat low to shield his eyes, hands resting lightly on the rail of the fence, his posture relaxed but attentive, allowing the women to navigate the space freely while remaining present, ready to guide if needed. Elsa rolled a meatball between her hands, noticing the way the sunlight highlighted tiny flecks of seasoning and the smoothness of the surface, a subtle tactile reassurance amidst the unfamiliar environment. She arranged the meatballs carefully on a tray, spacing them evenly, aligning them with a precision that felt meditative, each motion deliberate, each breath measured. A soft breeze stirred through the grass, carrying the faint call of a meadowlark, the rustle of leaves in the mesquite trees, and the occasional scrape of a pan from the kitchen, creating a layered symphony of ordinary ranch life. Elsa inhaled slowly, letting the combination of scents and sounds anchor her in the present, the rhythm of work and observation intertwining seamlessly. One of the younger women hesitated over a tray of chopped herbs, her hands trembling slightly, and Elsa leaned gently, showing her how to measure evenly, a quiet gesture of guidance, unspoken yet full of meaning. The other women glanced up, noting the calm composure in Elsa's movements, the subtle assurance in her guidance, and they mirrored her care in their own tasks. John moved closer, walking softly across the red dirt, pausing to tilt a water trough to allow a slow stream to fill, then adjusting a hay bale with deliberate care, his actions steady, predictable, grounding. Elsa allowed herself a small smile, the connection between observation and learning deepening, the rhythm of labor becoming a bridge between the two worlds she had come from and the one she was slowly becoming part of. The sunlight shifted, highlighting the textures of wood, metal, and animal fur, emphasizing the contrast between the bright, open plains and the careful, meticulous motions of the women at work. Elsa paused to wipe her brow with the edge of her apron, feeling the warmth on her skin and the slight dampness of effort, each gesture measured, purposeful. The women continued to move with quiet determination, arranging ingredients, shaping meatballs, and preparing trays with deliberate synchronization, their whispers blending with the ambient sounds of the ranch, the low murmur of cattle, the soft clop of hooves, and the wind threading through the grass. Elsa lifted a tray carefully, carrying it toward the stove, feeling the subtle weight in her hands and noting the way the sunlight played across the surface, casting small patterns of light and shadow. She placed the tray down gently, aligning it perfectly with the others, and stepped back to observe the arrangement, the neat rows of meatballs a visual representation of their shared effort and growing confidence. John stood nearby, eyes steady, observing the balance between independence and guidance, acknowledging the care and attention with a slight nod. Elsa allowed herself to breathe more freely, noticing the small satisfactions, the smoothness of the wooden table under her palms, the warmth of the sun on her back, the faint scent of herbs mingling with the meat, and she felt the quiet reinforcement of trust, both in herself and in the environment surrounding her. The afternoon stretched gently, the sun inching lower, lengthening. shadows and softening the light, highlighting the deliberate, careful movements of the women, the attentive presence of John, and the subtle, unspoken bonds forming through shared effort, observation, and the careful dance of guidance and autonomy. Each motion, each sound, each breath contributed to a growing sense of harmony, a quiet understanding of rhythm and presence, anchoring Elsa and the others in the reality of the ranch, a space at once unfamiliar and increasingly familiar, a world built on patience, attention, and the gentle unfolding of trust. The late afternoon light stretched across the Texas plains, painting the horizon in shades of gold and amber, the long shadows of the fence posts stretching across the red clay yard. Elsa Schmidt carried a tray of freshly rolled meatballs toward the stove, her hands steady and movements deliberate, each step a careful negotiation between balance and purpose. The other women moved with synchronized attention, whispering softly in German as they arranged ingredients, aligned trays, and prepared their cooking space with quiet precision. The air was rich with the mingling aromas of seasoned meat, fresh herbs, sizzling bacon, and the faint sweetness of sun-warmed hay, creating a sensory environment that grounded Elsa in the moment, connecting her to the present in a way she had not felt for months. John Brennan observed from the edge of the yard, hat tipped low, eyes steady and calm, his posture relaxed yet vigilant, allowing the women's space to work while maintaining an unobtrusive presence. Elsa paused briefly, placing her tray carefully on the counter, noting the way the sunlight caught the tiny flecks of seasoning and the smooth surfaces of the meatballs. She inhaled slowly, letting the warmth, the scents, and the sounds of the ranch fill her senses, the soft clop of hooves, the rustle of tall grass, the distant lowing of cattle, and the faint murmur of the wind through the mesquite trees. Each sound seemed amplified in the quiet vastness, and she felt the rhythm of the ranch settle into her own movements. One of the younger women, Anna, hesitated over a bowl of chopped herbs, hands trembling slightly, and Elsa moved toward her, demonstrating a careful pinch, a silent lesson in measurement and balance. Anna mirrored her movements, the tension easing from her shoulders, and Elsa noted the subtle shift, the small but tangible sign of growing confidence. John approached slowly, adjusting a water trough, tilting it gently so that a trickle flowed steadily, then moving to adjust a hay bale, his hands deliberate, his motions precise and calming. Elsa watched him, noting the quiet authority of his presence, the way his actions spoke louder than any words could, teaching through example rather than instruction. The sun dipped lower, warming the red clay and highlighting the textures of the wooden tables, metal bowls, and the soft fur of the animals moving around the pens. Elsa rolled another meatball, feeling the slight resistance under her palms, then placed it on the tray, spacing it evenly among the others, each movement careful, mindful, purposeful. The women murmured softly among themselves, sharing tips, observations, and quiet encouragements, their voices blending into the ambient sounds of the ranch, a chorus of learning and adaptation. Elsa exhaled slowly, the warmth of the sun, the steady rhythm of work, and the subtle reassurance from John weaving together into a sense of calm focus. She adjusted her apron, noting the glint of sunlight on the metal utensils and the smooth surfaces of the trays, and allowed herself a moment to take in the wide-open landscape. The rolling plains, the distant horizon, the gentle sway of the grasses, and the peaceful cadence of life unfolding around her. The other women moved with increasing certainty, mirroring Elsa's precision, their confidence growing with each careful gesture, each aligned tray, each shared glance. John continued his quiet observation, acknowledging their efforts with subtle nods and slight smiles, reinforcing the learning without words. Elsa inhaled deeply, feeling the integration of trust, attention, and purpose, the small but significant reassurance that she belonged here, that her actions contributed meaningfully to the shared rhythm of the ranch. The afternoon light continued to shift, shadows lengthening, colors softening into warmer hues, highlighting the careful, deliberate movements of the women, the patient guidance of John, and the subtle but growing bonds forming through shared work, observation, and quiet collaboration. Elsa paused for a moment, hand on the edge of a tray, listening to the symphony of ordinary life. the lowing of cattle, the rustle of grass, the soft scraping of tools on wood, and allowed herself to feel the small pulse of confidence and belonging, a quiet acknowledgement that she and the others were becoming part of the rhythm of this new world, each careful action weaving them more deeply into the life of the ranch. The late afternoon light deepened into warm gold, stretching shadows across the porch and the wide expanse of red clay yard. Elsa Schmidt carried a tray of meatballs toward the stove, steadying her steps as she navigated between the other women who moved with quiet purpose, their soft German whispers blending into the ambient sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the shuffle of hooves, and the gentle rustle of wine through the tall grasses. The aroma of cooking meat, fresh herbs, and sun-warmed hay enveloped the space, grounding her in the moment and heightening her awareness of every detail. The way sunlight glinted off the metal tray, the smooth texture of the meatballs under her fingertips, the faint creak of wooden boards beneath her boots. She paused briefly to adjust her apron and inhale the warm air, feeling the gentle weight of the day on her shoulders and the quiet pulse of life around her. John Brennan stood nearby, hat tipped low, arms crossed loosely as he watched the women work, his presence steady and unobtrusive, providing guidance without words. Elsa glanced toward him, noting the subtle acknowledgement in his slight nod as she arranged another tray with careful precision. The other women mirrored her movements, handling ingredients with deliberate care, chopping, measuring, and aligning each component with quiet concentration. Elsa paused to roll a meatball, feeling the resistance beneath her palms, then placed it neatly on the tray, spacing it evenly with the others, her motions deliberate and almost meditative. The soft murmur of conversation between the women, punctuated by small gestures of assistance and encouragement, blended seamlessly with the layered sounds of the ranch, the distant clatter of pans in the kitchen, the gentle swish of the wind through the mesquite trees, and the occasional call of a hawk circling above. She noticed the shifting sunlight highlighting the grain of the wooden tables, the sheen of the metal bowls, and the soft fur of the horses moving quietly in their pens, and allowed herself a small, quiet sense of satisfaction at the order and care emerging from their shared labor. John moved slowly among them, tilting a water trough to allow a steady flow into the pens, adjusting a hay bale with gentle precision, his calm presence reinforcing the rhythm of the day and the women's growing confidence. Elsa inhaled deeply, savoring the mixture of scents, the herbs, the meat, the faint trace of coffee from the kitchen, and felt the subtle reassurance of trust building, the silent acknowledgement that her attention to detail and care in her work mattered. She adjusted the last tray of meatballs on the counter, aligning it precisely, and stepped back to observe the scene, the synchronized movements of the women, the attentive but unobtrusive guidance of John, and the steady, deliberate cadence of life on the ranch. Each sound, each motion, each small action contributed to a growing sense of connection and purpose, a rhythm that Elsa felt embedding into her own senses. The golden light of the sun softened, shadows stretching further across the yard and highlighting the textures of wood, metal, and earth. Elsa paused, hand resting lightly on the counter, closing her eyes briefly to listen. The low hum of conversation, the soft scrape of utensils, the gentle shifting of horses, and the faint whisper of the wind. In that moment, she felt the quiet affirmation of competence and belonging, the subtle pulse of confidence and trust threading through her movements and those of the women around her. She opened her eyes, observing the last details of the kitchen space, the careful alignment of trays, the organized placement of ingredients, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection on the progression of the day. The sun dipped lower, bathing the porch and yard in rich amber tones, and Elsa felt a small, steady warmth in her chest, the comforting rhythm of labor, guidance, and attentive observation flowing seamlessly, embedding a quiet confidence and connection that would guide the remainder of the afternoon and shape the unfolding of their shared experience on the ranch. The sun was nearing the horizon, casting a deep golden light that stretched across the ranch, illuminating the dust in the air like a soft, glowing haze. Elsa Schmidt moved carefully, carrying a tray of meatballs toward the stove, her hands steady, each motion deliberate, as though the placement of each piece held meaning beyond the task itself. The other women followed suit, whispering softly in German, their words tentative but threaded with the faint stirrings of confidence. The smell of sizzling meat and fresh herbs mingled with the earthy scent of the clay yard and the faint sweetness of the hay, creating a sensory web that anchored Elsa to the moment. She paused for a breath, noticing the soft creak of the porch boards beneath her boots, the rustle of the tall grasses beyond the fence, and the gentle lowing of the cattle in the distance. John Brennan stood near the barn, hat tilted to shield his eyes, observing with steady, unintrusive patience, letting the women take initiative while subtly guiding them with his presence. Elsa glanced up at him, the slight nod he offered conveying approval, and she returned it with a small, quiet acknowledgement, feeling the connection in the silent communication. She moved to the counter, aligning the trays of meatballs with careful precision, each one spaced evenly, a visual reflection of the order and care she felt internally. The women around her mirrored the focus, handling ingredients with quiet attention, chopping, rolling, and arranging as if each motion were part of a deliberate ritual. The afternoon light shifted, highlighting the textures of the wooden counters, the metal trays, and the sun-warmed fur of the horses moving calmly in the pens. Elsa inhaled, letting the mixture of scents, the warmth, and the ambient sounds, the soft shuffle of feet, the faint clatter of utensils, the rustling of leaves, create a rhythm that she could move within, a cadence of work, attention, and subtle coordination. Anna hesitated over a tray of herbs, fingers trembling slightly, and Elsa reached gently to guide her hand, showing measurement and placement with quiet precision, a small act of mentorship that required no words. The subtle shift in Anna's posture and the ease that returned to her hands reflected the slow growth of confidence that was threading through all of the women. John walked closer, adjusting the water trough so that a gentle flow filled the container, his motions careful and deliberate, reinforcing the rhythm and order without interruption. Elsa observed the flow of water, the steadiness of his hands, the subtle guidance that came through consistent, measured action, and she felt the invisible line of trust strengthening between them. The sunlight deepened, slanting across the yard in long, warm lines, illuminating the synchronized movements of the women, the careful placement of each ingredient, and the attentive presence of John. Each sound, motion, and subtle glance wove together into a tapestry of quiet cooperation and focus, reinforcing a sense of purpose and inclusion. Elsa adjusted her apron, noting the gleam of sunlight on metal bowls and the natural grain of the wooden tables, and took a moment to absorb the collective rhythm, the deliberate motions, the quiet observations, the shared attentiveness. She felt a small surge of quiet pride, a recognition of her growing competence and integration into the life of the ranch. The shadows stretched longer, the colors of the plains deepened, and the ranch exhaled a steady, soothing pulse that intertwined with the deliberate cadence of work. Elsa paused, hand resting lightly on the tray, listening to the gentle chorus of sounds, the soft murmurs of the women, the clop of hooves, the distant rustle of wind, the faint creak of boards, and allowed herself a deep sense of calm focus, a quiet affirmation that she and the others were contributing to something larger, a rhythm of effort, observation, and shared purpose that would carry them through the remainder of the day. The evening light settled across the ranch, deepening the colors of the clay yard and stretching the shadows of fence posts and barn structures into long, soft lines. Elsa Schmidt moved slowly, carrying a tray of seasoned meatballs toward the stove, each step deliberate, attuned to the rhythm of the ranch and the subtle guidance of John Brennan, who stood nearby, observing without intrusion. The other women mirrored her careful motions, their whispers in German blending into the ambient sounds of the ranch, the soft clop of horse hooves, the rustle of tall grasses, the faint lowing of cattle, and the occasional creak of a gate swinging in the wind. The air was warm, carrying the mixed aromas of herbs, cooking meat, coffee from the kitchen, and the earthy scent of sun-baked soil, each inhalation grounding Elsa in the present. She paused briefly, aligning the tray with the others, and noted the sunlight glinting off the metal surface, the way the shadows played across the wooden counters, and the textures of the ingredients she was arranging. Her fingers brushed lightly against the smooth surfaces of the meatballs, each touch measured, each motion deliberate, creating a quiet sense of order in a space that had only recently begun to feel familiar. Jean moved with measured steps, adjusting the water troughs and checking the feed, his motions precise and calming, reinforcing a sense of rhythm without a single word. Elsa observed him, the subtle nods he offered, the soft acknowledgement in his posture, and she felt a small surge of quiet confidence, a recognition that her efforts were meaningful and that she was trusted to carry out her tasks with care. The women whispered gently among themselves, offering small gestures of assistance, quiet encouragements, and shared observations, their voices forming a soft undercurrent to the layered sounds of the ranch. Elsa allowed herself a faint smile as she noted Anna's growing ease with the preparation of herbs, the subtle shift in posture and motion, and the slow unfolding of trust between them. The sunlight shifted lower, bathing the yard in a soft amber glow, highlighting the movements of the women, the precise arrangement of ingredients, and the steady, deliberate presence of John. Each motion, each glance, each breath contributed to the sense of quiet coordination, a rhythm that Elsa felt embedding into her own movements. She placed the last tray of meatballs carefully, aligning it with the others, and exhaled, the warmth of the sun on her shoulders, the subtle sense in the air, and the gentle cadence of the ranch life coalescing into a tangible sense of accomplishment. The women paused briefly, observing the small visual harmony they had created, the even spacing of trays, the careful arrangement of ingredients, and the way the afternoon light illuminated their work. Elsa allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, feeling the quiet reinforcement of trust, competence, and belonging. The wind carried the soft sounds of activity from the barn, the faint rustle of grass, and the distant calls of birds circling overhead, blending into a steady rhythm that complemented the deliberate motions within the kitchen. Elsa glanced toward John, who offered a slight, approving nod, a silent acknowledgement that conveyed confidence, reassurance, and subtle connection. She returned the gesture with a soft lift of her head, absorbing the calm steadiness of his presence and the growing ease in the women around her. Shadows lengthened further, the colors of the plains deepening into soft golds and muted oranges, and Elsa felt the quiet satisfaction of shared effort, the gentle unfolding of trust, and the integration of focus, observation, and attentive work into the collective rhythm of the ranch. She paused, hand resting lightly on the counter, listening to the subtle chorus, the muted clatter of utensils, the soft shuffle of feet, the low murmur of voices, and the faint rustle of wind, and allowed herself to feel the quiet assurance that her presence, care, and attention had meaning, weaving her more deeply into the life, rhythm, and steady pulse of the ranch as the day gradually faded toward evening. The evening sun dipped closer to the horizon, casting the Texas plains in a warm, amber glow, the long shadows of fence posts stretching across the red clay yard. Elsa Schmidt carefully carried a tray of meatballs toward the stove, each step deliberate, mindful of the rhythm that had settled over the ranch throughout the day. The other women moved alongside her, whispering softly in German, their voices carrying the tentative confidence that had grown over hours of careful work, each movement measured, precise, and synchronized with the shared flow of activity. The air was heavy with the mingled scents of herbs, sizzling meat, coffee from the kitchen, and the faint sweetness of hay, creating a grounding tapestry of smell that wrapped around the women as they worked. Elsa paused to inhale deeply, feeling the warmth of the late sun on her shoulders and the steady pulse of life around her. John Brennan remained nearby, hat tipped against the sun, arms crossed lightly, observing with patient attention, allowing the women the freedom to act independently while subtly guiding them through his presence. Elsa met his eyes briefly, noticing the quiet approval in his slight nod, a gesture that carried the weight of trust and encouragement. She returned the nod with a faint lift of her head, acknowledging the connection without words, and moved back to the counter to align the trays with meticulous care. Each meatball was spaced evenly, each tray arranged with precision, reflecting the quiet discipline and attention to detail that had been cultivated over the course of the afternoon. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grasses, carrying the soft calls of birds, the distant lowing of cattle, and the faint creak of gates and boards. The women paused briefly to observe, their soft whispers of encouragement and guidance blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the ranch. Elsa noticed Anna hesitating over a tray of herbs, fingers trembling slightly, and moved closer to guide her hand, demonstrating measurement and placement with quiet precision. The subtle adjustment eased Anna's movements, reinforcing confidence and shared understanding. John shifted his attention to the horses, adjusting a water trough, tilting it just enough for a gentle flow, and checking the hay bales with deliberate care, his presence reinforcing the rhythm of the work without words. Elsa inhaled the rich mixture of scents again, the herbs, meat, hay, and warmth of the sun, feeling a growing assurance in her movements, in her judgment, and in her connection to the ranch. The light shifted again, painting the yard in shades of gold and deepening shadows, illuminating the careful motions of the women, the steady presence of John, and the alignment of trays and ingredients that reflected shared effort and concentration. Elsa allowed herself a brief moment of quiet reflection, hands resting on the counter as she absorbed the scene, the meticulous arrangements, the synchronized movements, the muted sounds of life around her, and the gentle, steady presence that guided them all. Each detail, the subtle gestures, the careful spacing, the attentive observation, reinforced a sense of harmony, competence, and inclusion. The soft chorus of wind, rustling grass, hoofbeats, and distant calls of animals threaded through their work, creating a rhythm that was tangible and reassuring. Elsa glanced once more toward John, who offered another subtle nod, the faintest acknowledgement of effort and growing confidence, and she felt a quiet warmth in her chest, the understanding that she belonged here, that her work mattered, and that her careful attention to detail contributed meaningfully to the rhythm and life of the ranch. The shadows lengthened further, the golden tones of sunset softening across the yard, and Elsa exhaled slowly, sensing the quiet culmination of hours of deliberate effort, observation, and learning, the delicate interweaving of trust, attention, and purpose settling into the cadence of their shared afternoon as the ranch exhaled gently around them, the sun dipping ever lower toward the horizon.